Hand-me-down shoes, holes in the soul in the story. They laughed at my dreams, called every plan just a fantasy. Coffee in a chip cup.
Welcome back to AI Compliance Foundations. If you're going to govern AI, regulate AI, or just trying to keep your company out of trouble, you need to speak the language. One of the biggest barriers in AI governance right now is the communication gap between the compliance teams and the engineering teams. They use terms like neural networks, LLMs, and machine learning, as if everyone inherently knows what they mean. Today, we're going to fix that. We're going to strip away the jargon and break down the core concepts you need to know in plain English. Let's start at the very foundation, the algorithm. An algorithm is simply a set of instructions. Think of it like a recipe. If you want to bake a cake, the recipe tells you, take 2 eggs, add flour, mix, and bake at 350 degrees. In computer science, an algorithm is a recipe that tells the computer how to process data to get a result. In traditional programming, a human writes the recipe step by step. The computer just follows the instructions exactly as written. So, what makes an algorithm artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is a very broad umbrella term. It refers to any computer system that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, like recognizing speech, making decisions, or translating languages. If traditional programming is giving the computer a recipe, AI is asking the computer to figure out how to bake the cake on its own. Under that massive umbrella of AI, we find machine learning, or ML. This is where things get interesting. In machine learning, we don't give the computer the recipe. Instead, we give the computer thousands of pictures of cakes and thousands of pictures of things that are not cakes. And we tell it, figure out the pattern. The machine learns the recipe by analyzing the data. It finds correlations and probabilities that a human programmer could never write out by hand. When regulators talk about the risks of AI, they are almost always talking about the risks of machine learning because the computer figured out the pattern on its own. It can be very difficult for a human to understand why the computer made a certain decision. That's the famous black box problem, which we'll cover in section 3. Moving deeper, we have a subset of machine learning called deep learning. Deep learning uses complex, multi-layered algorithms called neural networks. These are loosely inspired by the human brain. If you've heard about self-driving cars, recognizing stop signs, or medical software identifying tumors and x-rays, that is usually deep learning at work. It requires massive amounts of data and massive computing power. And finally, nested at the very center of this, we have the technology that caused the regulatory explosion we are seeing today in 2026, generative AI. Specifically, large language models, or LLMs. Generative AI doesn't just analyze data to make a decision. It creates new data. It writes emails, generates code, and draws pictures based on the patterns it learned during its training. Systems like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot are large language models. They ingested basically the entire internet, learned the statistical probability of which words follow other words, and used that to generate human-like text. All right, let's do a quick recap. At the top, we have artificial intelligence, or AI. A layer below, we have machine learning, or ML. Below that, we have deep learning. Below that, we have Gen AI, or LLMs. Why do you need to know this? Because regulations treat these things differently. A simple rule-based algorithm might not fall under the strict transparency requirements of the EU AI Act, but a deep learning model making decisions about hiring or loans absolutely does. And generative AI models have entirely separate sets of rules regarding copyright and data privacy. When you sit down with your tech team, you now know the difference. This wraps up section 1. You now know what AI governance is, why it matters, the cost of getting it wrong, and the language you need to speak. In section 2, we're going to look closely at the rule books themselves, starting with the heavy hitter, the EU AI Act. I'll see you in the next section.